Hello my YouTube family, I'm Crime Whisper. I know many of you like listening to these stories as you fall asleep. So before you drift off, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're tuning in from. And if you enjoy tonight's story, don't forget to like and subscribe now. Let's get comfortable, relax, and dive into tonight's chilling case story. One in the history of American crime. There are names that send shivers down people's spines, and BTK is one of them for over 3 decades. This mysterious serial killer turned the city of Wichita into a place of fear. He didn't just kill, he terrorized BTK, taunted police and media with cruel, mocking letters, turning himself into a dark legend that haunted Kansas for years. But who was this man hiding behind such evil crimes? And what could turn an ordinary person into one of America's most cold-blooded killers? Tonight, we uncover the horrifying truth. That was the morning of January 15th, 1974. Warm sunlight filled the peaceful city of Wichita, Kansas, inside their modest home. The Otero family, Joseph, 38, his wife Julie, and their 5 children were starting another normal Tuesday. Their house was always full of laughter, warmth, and love. That morning, the parents took their 3 oldest children to school, while 11-year-old Josephine and 9-year-old Joseph Jr. stayed home. No one could have imagined it would be the last morning they'd ever share together. Few hours later, the quiet was broken by the sound of a car engine stopping outside. A man climbed over the backyard fence and moved silently toward the house with methodical precision. He cut the telephone lines, isolating the family completely. The intruder left a small knife in the grass, then crept toward the back door at that moment. Young Joseph Jr. stepped outside to walk the dog and came face to face with the stranger, startled. The man pulled out a pistol and aimed it at the boy. "What game are you playing, mister?" Joseph Jr. asked innocently. Unaware of the danger, the man didn't respond. His cold eyes ordered the boy back inside. Terrified, Joseph Jr. obeyed. Joseph and Julie froze at the sight of their son held at gunpoint. Josephine began to cry. The man claimed he was a fugitive from California, warning them not to resist, or he'd shoot under his threat. The family obeyed. He forced them into a bedroom and tied their hands and feet tightly with rope, so tight that their skin turned purple when the parents begged for mercy. He ignored them moments later. He strangled Julie as her children screamed, afraid the noise would attract attention. He placed plastic bags and t-shirts over young Joseph Jr.'s head. Then he dragged Josephine to the basement there. He tied the little girl to a pipe, stripped her, and cruelly asked, "Does your family have a camera? I want to capture this moment." When she said no, he whispered chillingly, "You'll go to heaven soon. Just like your family." Then he killed her too after finishing his crimes. He calmly left the house, as if nothing had happened. But halfway down the street, he suddenly remembered the knife he'd left behind. Fearing it could expose him, he turned around and quietly retrieved it, an act that nearly led to his capture that evening. When the 3 older Otero children returned home from school, they expected dinner and laughter, but instead walked into a nightmare. They found the bodies of their parents and 2 younger siblings. The horror was unimaginable. Panicking, they tried to call the police, only to discover the telephone lines had been cut. But facing a criminal with a disturbing level of intelligence and control, the telephone lines had been cut, leaving the 3 Otero children with no way to call for help. Terrified, they ran from house to house, desperately banging on neighbors' doors, until someone finally called the police. When officers arrived, they found a modest single-story home with white-painted walls, a gray tile roof, and a small wooden fence surrounding the backyard. But the moment they stepped inside, even the most seasoned investigators froze. What they saw was pure horror. For members of one family, 2 parents and 2 children were dead. Every detail pointed to a killer who had planned this meticulously. This was no spontaneous act of rage. It was a carefully executed massacre. In the 1970s, surveillance systems were rare, leaving police to depend entirely on witness statements and whatever small clues They could find but every lead nowhere. The Otero family was well liked, peaceful, and had no known enemies, so who could have done something so monstrous, and why kill the children too? News of the Otero murders spread through Wichita like wildfire, plunging the city into fear. Doors that were once left unlocked were now bolted shut. People checked over their shoulders. Police interviewed hundreds of residents. But the killer had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions and nightmares. Then, just 3 months later, another tragedy struck on April 4th, 1974. 21-year-old Kathy Bright and her brother Kevin returned home, only to find a stranger waiting inside. A violent struggle broke out in their own living room. Kevin fought with everything he had and managed to escape barely alive. He sprinted down the street, screaming for help, but it was too late for his sister. Kathy was found stabbed multiple times, her body bearing the same cold precision as the Otero victims. Kevin survived, but the trauma would haunt him forever. He could only tell police that the attacker was a man wearing a mask, driving what appeared to be a black Jeep Cherokee 2 cases. In just a few months left Wichita on edge. Detectives began to see chilling similarities. Both crimes happened during the day. Both victims were attacked in their homes, and both scenes showed signs of methodical brutality. It didn't take long before investigators suspected they were dealing with the same serial killer who planned his every move. After that, Wichita went eerily quiet. No similar murders occurred for the next 3 years. People tried to convince themselves that maybe the killer had moved on or been caught somewhere else, but in reality, it was only the calm before the storm. Then came March 1977. The peace shattered once again when 24-year-old Shirley Vianra, a single mother, was murdered in her own home in a horrifying twist. Her 3 small children witnessed the entire attack, according to their statements. The killer wore a mask and tied their mother to a bedpost before placing a plastic bag over her head and tightening a rope until she stopped breathing. The children's cries filled the room, but nothing stopped him just as he was about to harm them too. The phone rang unexpectedly. Startled, the killer panicked and fled the scene, leaving the terrified children alive but scarred for life. Police immediately connected this new case with the earlier ones. The pattern, the cruelty, the control, it was unmistakable. The BTK killer was backhand. He wasn't done yet. 9 months later, in December 1977, he struck again. The victim was 25-year-old Nancy Fox. This time, he showed a new level of arrogance after murdering her. The killer called the police station from a public payphone himself. In a calm, almost mocking voice, he said, "Yes, you'll find a homicide at 843 South Pershing." Nancy Fox. He described the crime scene in detail, his tone chillingly casual, like a man proud of his work. The call infuriated investigators but also revealed something terrifying. They weren't just chasing a sadistic killer, they were up against a methodical, intelligent predator, man who wanted to be caught, but only on his own terms. Sue had vanished for more than a decade, suddenly reappeared, as if the article had awakened the monster within him. The twisted mind behind BTK bore all the traits of a pathological narcissist. He didn't just want to kill, he wanted fame. He wanted his name too. Spread fear across every home in Wichita, across the entire country. To him, the murders weren't enough. He wanted recognition. In December 1978, while police were still drowning in dead ends, a chilling letter arrived at a Wichita television station. Inside was a detailed confession, cold, calculated, and shockingly arrogant. The writer claimed responsibility for every murder that had shaken the city since 1974, and at the bottom of the letter, he finally named himself BTKHE. Explained that BTK stood for bind, torture, kill. Those 3 words were his twisted code, his signature. He demanded that from then on, everyone referred to him only by that name. In his own words, he complained bitterly that the media hadn't given him enough attention. "How many people do I have to kill?" he wrote. to get my name in the papers and be known nationwide. Attached to the letter was a poem, a disturbing piece of writing that mocked police and celebrated the murder of Nancy Fox. His tone was dripping with arrogance, as if he were showing off his artwork. He even compared himself to Jack the Ripper, claiming that his crimes were inspired by a mysterious, supernatural force he couldn't resist. The letter was immediately handed over to the police, who were both horrified and furious, realizing they were dealing with a killer who craved attention. The Wichita Police Department tried something unconventional. They responded to BTK's message publicly during a local evening news broadcast. They aired a short clip showing a pair of eyeglasses turned upside down, a clue from one of the crime scenes, along with the message, "Call the police chief now." It was a desperate attempt to lure him out, to provoke a reaction, but BTK never replied. Instead, the city was left in silence, a silence heavy with fear. Police warned residents that BTK had no fixed pattern, that he could strike anytime, anywhere. Wichita was paralyzed with tension, and BTK loved it. Over the years, he continued to send taunting letters, ridiculing investigators and their failure to catch him. The people of Wichita lived in constant fear. They checked locks twice, looked over their shoulders, and avoided being home alone time. Past 11 long years since BTK first appeared, the fear had slowly faded, the memories dulled, and that's when he returned in 1985. After years of silence, BTK killed again. The victim was Maureen Hedge, a 53-year-old woman living in Park City, about 6 miles from Wichita. After murdering her, he dragged her body into a remote ditch and covered it with dry branches, his way of hiding his work. A year later, in 1986, 28-year-old Vicky Wegerle became his next victim once again. It was a meticulously planned killing, and once again, he vanished afterward. No letters, no calls, no clues. Wichita fell back into uneasy quiet for the next 5 years. There were no murders connected to BTK. People started to believe the nightmare was over, that maybe the killer had died or moved away. But in 1991, he returned one final time. His last known victim was Dolores Davis, a 62-year-old woman whose body was discovered beneath a bridge in a wooded area. A young girl walking her dog made the gruesome discovery after the animal began barking uncontrollably at a strange smell coming from the thicket. By then, BTK had claimed 10 lives and then silence for the next 13 years. BTK disappeared completely. No letters, no murders, no sign that he even existed. It was as if he had evaporated, or so everyone thought then. In 2004, he came back. Local media outlets in Wichita began receiving a new wave of haunting letters, 11 in total in March of that year. The Wichita Eagle received one signed Bill Thomas Kilman in it. The writer claimed responsibility for the 1986 murder of Vicky Wegerle. The same time, science had finally caught up with him. A forensic lab discovered DNA under Vicky Wegerle's fingernails, DNA belonging to an unidentified man. Police immediately launched one of the largest DNA collection efforts in Kansas history, testing over 1,300 men in Wichita and Park City. The campaign stirred controversy. Many residents felt it violated privacy rights, but investigators were desperate. Yet, to their frustration, none of the DNA samples matched by court order. All the samples were later destroyed to protect citizens' privacy. That same year, the Wichita Eagle published an article marking the 30th anniversary of the Otero family murders. Just when everyone thought the past had been buried for good, BTK answered he had hidden in plain sight for many years. But when he read that article, his rage erupted. The piece mentioned him only briefly, far too little for someone so obsessed with recognition, enraged and craving attention. The narcissistic killer decided to strike again, not through murder this time, but through manipulation and fear. He began sending new threatening letters to both the police and the newspaper, reigniting the city's terror. The police feared BTK might kill again, but this time, his goal was different. He wanted to toy with them. he crafted eerie dolls, each posed to replicate the position of one of his victims, placed them inside boxes, and left these gruesome gifts scattered across the city. Then, he would call the police, or media, dropping cryptic hints to lead them to his macabre displays. In February 2005, BTK sent another letter to the police, filled with arrogance. "If I send you a floppy disk," he asked, "can it be traced? Tell me the truth, I need to know." He was taunting them. Convinced he could outsmart the authorities, once again police seized this golden opportunity through the Wichita Eagle. They publicly assured BTK that a floppy disk would be completely safe and untraceable, taking the bait. The killer mailed one shortly after, but Dennis Rader, BTK, had severely underestimated modern forensics. On that floppy disk, investigators found a hidden file linking back to Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita. The file's metadata showed the name Dennis. Following this lead, police discovered a man named Dennis Rader, a church council president and city compliance officer living in nearby Park City. When detectives began discreet surveillance, one detail stood out immediately: a black Jeep Cherokee parked in front of his house, the same car model described decades earlier by the brother of victim Catherine Bright. Still, the police needed irrefutable proof before moving in. Their breakthrough came through Rader's daughter, Carrie. Years earlier, during a college health check, she had unknowingly left behind a DNA sample. Investigators secretly obtained it and compared it with the DNA found under one of BTK's 1986 victims, Vicky Wigarell. The results were conclusive. The killer was her father. On February 25, 2005, after more than 30 years of hiding behind the mask of a devoted husband, father, and church leader, Dennis Rader was arrested for multiple counts of first-degree murder. The subsequent search of his home and property revealed the chilling truth. His computer contained violent, sadistic material. His shed held masks, ropes, and stockings, tools of his horrific crimes. When his family learned the truth, their world collapsed. To them, Dennis had been a quiet, loving man, a doting father, and faithful husband. His daughter Carrie was especially devastated. Her father, the man who once reassured her that everything will be okay when she was scared of was BTK himself. During interrogation, Rader was disturbingly calm, even concerned about his comfort in prison and whether other inmates might harm him. He confessed in chilling detail, beginning with his first crime in January 1974, the murder of the Otero family. He had targeted only Julie Otero, but when he found her husband and children at home, he decided to kill them all. That night marked his entrance into a dark, addictive world of control and death. 3 months later came Project Lights Out. His attack on Catherine Bright. He broke into her home, cut the glass door, and waited when Catherine arrived with her brother. Rader improvised, pretending to be an escaped convict needing food and money. He tied them up with whatever was available, towels, sheets, and turned up the stereo to mask the noise. But his plan unraveled. Catherine's brother freed himself, and a violent struggle broke out. Rader fired, grazing the man's head, who then fell to the ground and pretended to be dead without checking. Rader moved on to finish his next victim, unaware that his dead witness would later identify the car that would one day expose him. Then he turned his attention to the room where Catherine was being held. When she realized her brother had been shot, Catherine broke down completely, screaming in terror. No matter how hard Dennis tried, he couldn't silence her, afraid the neighbors would hear. He panicked and changed his plan. Instead of strangling her with a rope as intended, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her repeatedly in the chest. At that very moment, Catherine's brother, who had been pretending to be dead, suddenly leaped to his feet and bolted out of the house, shouting for help. Seeing this, Dennis panicked. He rushed outside, jumped into his car, and sped away because he always wore a mask during his crimes. Catherine's brother couldn't see his face clearly, a small mercy that allowed Dennis Rader to remain free. The close call terrified him for 3 years. BTK went completely silent, but in March 1977, His murderous urges returned. His next target was 24-year-old single mother, Shirley Vianne Relford. Ironically, she wasn't his original choice that day. His intended victim wasn't home. So he looked for another as he drove through a neighborhood. He spotted a young boy playing outside alone. Rader approached, pretending to be friendly, and showed the boy a photograph of a woman and child, his own wife and daughter. He lied, saying he was a detective looking for them, and asked if the boy recognized them. When the boy said no, Dennis feigned urgency and asked him to take him home so he could show the photo to his mother. The innocent child agreed. When they arrived, the boy's mother, Shirley, opened the door. She examined the photo carefully and said she didn't know the people in it the moment she relaxed. Dennis drew his gun and forced his way inside once again. He pretended to be a fugitive on the run from police, claiming he only wanted food and money. The children, 3 in total, began crying uncontrollably. Dennis led them into the bathroom, promising they would be safe, and locked the door. He even stacked furniture in front of it to block their escape, trying to calm them. He brought toys and blankets into the bathroom, a chilling act of false kindness. Then he turned to Shirley. He tied her to the bed, placed a plastic bag over her head, and began torturing her. Shirley begged for her life, gasping and pleading through tears. Her desperation only seemed to excite him more. Finally, he tightened a rope around her neck until she stopped moving behind the locked bathroom door. Her children's cries echoed the sound of innocence witnessing horror. Rader intended to kill them too, to eliminate witnesses, but just as he was preparing to act, the phone rang. Startled, he decided not to risk it. He fled the scene, leaving the children alive but forever scarred. 9 months later, he found a new victim, 25-year-old Nancy Fox. He called this murder project Fox Hunt. The name alone revealed his sick ego and obsession with control, like a hunter stalking prey. He broke into her home while she was out, cutting the phone line and hiding. When Nancy returned, he emerged and subdued her. Nancy screamed, threatening to call the police, but Dennis told her it was useless. The phone was already dead. Calmly, he lit a cigarette for her, telling her it would help her relax. Then he sexually assaulted her before strangling her with a belt, tightening and loosening it over and over, savoring her final moments of resistance. When she finally went still, he whispered in her ear, "I am the notorious BTK." Afterward, he drove to a nearby payphone and called the police himself. The first time he directly reached out, the thrill of taunting authorities gave him a rush unlike any other. Soon after, he sent a letter to a Wichita TV station, officially declaring his identity as BTK, short for bind, torture, kill in his delusional mind. These murders were his art. He believed he was creating something meaningful, and that the world owed him attention when the media coverage wasn't enough to satisfy his ego. He escalated his communications, sending more letters to ensure the spotlight stayed on Jimin. 1979. He set his sights on 63-year-old Anna Williams. He broke into her house and waited for hours, but she never came home that night. Frustrated, he left empty-handed. Anna never knew how close she had come to death. For several years afterward, Rader seemed to disappear outwardly. He lived as a devoted husband and father, immersing himself in his job and church duties. The very image of a model citizen. No one could have imagined that beneath that calm, respectable exterior lived one of the most sadistic killers in American history. 6 quiet years passed before his dark impulses returned. In 1985, he chose a new victim, 53-year-old Maureen Hedge. His own neighbor, he called this crime project Cookie. He wanted to see if he could get away with killing someone who lived so close. One night, he broke into her home, cut the phone line, and hid in a closet. When Maureen returned, he ambushed her, tied her up, and strangled her. Then, he did something even more disturbing. He took her body to Christ's Lutheran Church, where he was a trusted council member. Using his keys, he entered the church, sealed the windows with black plastic, and turned on the lights in that sacred space. He desecrated her body before dumping it in a remote ditch at dawn. A year later, Rader noticed 28-year-old Vicky Wiegerl playing piano inside her home. The music drew him in, and he decided she would be his next project. Project Piano posing as a telephone repairman. He knocked on her door, ready to strike once more. He pretended to check the phone lines, chatting casually with Vicky as he worked her baby, slept quietly in a nearby crib. A picture of calm innocence that made what followed all the more horrifying. Dennis waited patiently for the perfect moment. Then, without warning, he pulled out his gun and aimed it at the unsuspecting young mother. Vicky fought back desperately, screaming that her husband would be home any minute. The thought of being caught sent Dennis into a violent frenzy. In a fit of rage, he strangled her to death afterward. He calmly took out his camera and photographed her lifeless body, a grotesque ritual that fed his twisted sense of control. Leaving the house, he drove to a grocery store parking lot and sat there for a while, trying to steady his nerves. When he finally drove back down the same street, his blood ran cold. Police cars were already outside Vicky's home. Her husband had returned and discovered the murder. Dennis barely escaped, shaken but also exhilarated by how close he had come to being caught. That near miss silenced him once again for 5 long years. He stayed dormant until 1991, when a woman named Dolores Davis became his next victim. She lived alone in a quiet neighborhood near an abandoned dog kennel. So he named this murder project Doghouse. Rader stalked her for weeks, noting her routines. She was cautious, strong locks, reinforced windows, not an easy target, so he came up with a plan. He would break a window to lure her outside, then ambush her on the night of the attack. Dennis walked to her house to avoid leaving tire tracks. He crossed fields and even a cemetery before arriving around 11 p.m. From outside, he saw the faint glow of a lamp through the window. Dolores sat on her sofa reading. He waited patiently until the lights went out, then, picking up a stone, he hurled it through her bedroom window. The shattering glass broke the silence of the night. Startled awake, Dolores looked out and saw a dark figure standing outside. Thinking it was someone who had crashed into her house, she angrily demanded the person pay for the damage. Dennis used his familiar lie, claiming he was being chased by police and needed to hide for a while, suspicious and afraid. Dolores refused and threatened to call the police. That was all it took for his mask to drop. He pulled his gun and threatened to shoot if she didn't cooperate. Terrified, Dolores opened the door. He rushed in, overpowered her, and began searching for food in the kitchen as if nothing had happened. Her pleas for mercy meant nothing to him. Moments later, he strangled her to death. He then placed her body in her own car, drove to a secluded bridge, and dumped it in the bushes. Returning to the house, he threw her car keys onto the roof, an idea he had copied from a detective novel, hoping to mislead investigators. When Rader finally confessed years later, detectives were horrified by his calm, methodical retelling. His victims had been complete strangers. He killed simply because he wanted to satisfy the dark urges that consumed him. Even more disturbing, he admitted that after his murders, he would sometimes wear his victims' clothes, posing in their garments to relive his crimes and fuel his fantasies. He also kept trophies, small personal items, to remind himself of each killing. But how had he become such a monster? The answer, at least in part, lay in his past. Dennis Rader was born in 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the eldest of 4 children in a working-class family. Because his parents were often busy, he was sent to live with relatives in Wichita, where he grew up lonely and withdrawn from an early age. He displayed troubling behavior, torturing animals, secretly wearing women's clothes, and spying on neighbors. But he hid it well, maintaining the image of a polite, well-behaved boy. He dropped out of high school after 1 year and later joined the U.S. Air Force, where he gained technical skills he would later use to stalk and control his victims. After his discharge at age 25, he moved to Park City and took a job at a supermarket the next year. He married Paula Dietz and appeared to live a normal family. He later worked for a security company installing alarm systems, many for people terrified of BTK. None of them realized that the man setting up their home security was the very killer they feared by 1991, at age 46. Dennis Rader had become a respected member of his community, serving as a church council president and working as an animal control officer, but behind that mask of decency, he was still a predator. Neighbors recalled how he used his authority to intimidate single women, sometimes harassing them so persistently that they filed restraining orders, or even moved away after 31 years of terror. The BTK case finally came to trial in February 2005. Prosecutors charged Dennis Rader with 10 counts of first-degree murder and multiple related offenses in court. They laid out his brutal crimes in chronological order, detailing how from 1974 to 1991, he had taken the lives of 10 innocent people, most of them women, through sadistic, premeditated methods. His victims had never known him. They were chosen at random, murdered purely to fulfill his depraved fantasies in court. Prosecutors presented chilling evidence, photographs, bindings. Even the mask he had worn. Rader showed little emotion, admitting to all charges in a shocking display of composure. He spent half an hour apologizing to the victims' families. Though his words rang hollow, the courtroom fell silent, not from forgiveness, but from horror, as the man who had once been a husband, father, and church leader stood revealed as BTK, bind, torture, kill off, the people who had helped them. The German soldiers soon discovered the family's involvement in a brutal act of retaliation. The entire family was executed, a husband, a wife, and their 2 young children. This moment would haunt Bushell for the rest of his life. The guilt of their deaths carved itself deep into his mind, fueling a burning determination from that day forward. He swore that if he ever had the chance, he would make the Germans pay, not through violence, but through defiance. When he was later transferred to Stalag Luft 3, he quickly became the de facto leader of all British prisoners, known among his fellow inmates as Big X. Bushell had one clear mission: to organize the most daring and large-scale escape attempt in history. But this wasn't just about freedom. It was about humiliation. Humiliating the Nazi regime by showing that their so-called escape-proof camp could be broken. Bushell's leadership. Meticulous planning began. The plan was staggering in its scale. 3 tunnels, simultaneously built, each with different entry and exit points. They were codenamed Tom, Dick, and Harry. The idea was simple, but brilliant. If one tunnel was discovered, the Germans would assume the project ended, while the others could continue secretly. But how do you dig tunnels under a raised building, filled with sand that collapsed at the slightest vibration? That's where ingenuity came in. The prisoners constructed makeshift shoring panels out of stolen wooden bed boards to reinforce the tunnel walls. They used tin cans, from food rations to craft digging tools for lighting. They wired lamps, using stolen electrical parts, and for air, they built a hand-pumped ventilation system using milk cans and rubber hoses. Disposing of the sand was another major issue. They couldn't simply dump it in the open. It was too noticeable, so they filled small pouches hidden inside their trousers, releasing sand discreetly around the camp during outdoor activities, earning them the nickname penguins. Because of the way they waddled as they emptied the dirt, the level of organization was extraordinary. Over 600 prisoners participated in some form, digging, forging documents, sewing civilian clothes, or memorizing train routes across Europe. Fake identity papers, ration cards, and maps were produced inside the camp using nothing more than old books, colored pencils, and patience. Everything was designed to give the escapees the best chance once they got outside after months of secret work. Tunnel Harry was completed, stretching over 300 feet beyond the camp's perimeter fence. On the night of March 24, 1944, 200 men prepared to crawl through the tunnel to freedom, but things didn't go as planned. The tunnel exit emerged short of the forest, fully exposed to the guard towers. Still, they pressed on, one by one. The men slid into the cold, cramped tunnel. Everything had to move like clockwork. one man every 10 minutes, but disaster struck around dawn. A guard spotted movement in the snow near the tunnel exit. The alarm was raised, searchlights flared to life. Sirens screamed across the compound. Only 76 men made it out before the Germans discovered the escape. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in history. Thousands of German soldiers, police, and even Hitler's SS scoured the countryside within 2 weeks. 73 of the 76 escapees were captured in a furious rage. Hitler ordered them executed despite protests from his officers. 50 prisoners were shot, a direct violation of the Geneva Convention. Roger Bushell was among those killed, though most didn't make it. The escape became legendary, a story of courage, unity, and defiance in the face of oppression. It came to be known as the Great Escape. And even though the Nazis thought they had crushed the prisoner's spirit, they couldn't have been more wrong. The story of Stalag Luft 3 inspired countless others and stood as a testament to human resilience, that even behind barbed wire, freedom can never be completely caged. Hay pretended to check the phone lines while casually talking with Vicky, all the while watching her sleeping infant in the next room, a tiny, innocent presence that made his violence even more monstrous when the moment was right. He suddenly pulled a gun on the young mother. Vicky fought and screamed that her husband would be home any minute, and the thought of being interrupted sent Rader into a rage. He strangled her to death, then calmly took photographs of her body afterward. He sat in a grocery store parking lot for a time, then crept back down the street, seeing police at Vicky's house as he passed. He realized how narrowly he had escaped. The close call rattled him, and once again he fell silent. 5 years later, in 1991, Dolores Davis became his next target. He named this plan Doghouse because of an old kennel near her home and stalked her for days, noting her reinforced doors and windows to lure her out. He smashed a window late at night and waited. He walked to her house to avoid leaving tire tracks, crossing lonely fields and a cemetery before arriving. When Dolores, startled awake, peered out and saw a shadowed figure, Rader spun his usual lie. He was a man on the run, seeking temporary shelter when she refused and threatened to call the police. He pulled a gun and forced his way inside. He overpowered her, searched the kitchen as if nothing had happened, and then murdered her. He placed her body in her car, dumped it beneath a bridge, and, in a callous bit of mimicry taken from crime fiction, tossed her car keys onto the roof to mislead investigators. Rader's confessions left investigators chilled. He admitted his victims were strangers, chosen only to gratify his dark urges. He described wearing their clothes afterward to act out his fantasies, and keeping trophies to memorialize each crime. The roots of his cruelty stretched back to his childhood. Born in 1945 in Pitt, Kansas, he was the eldest of 4 left in Wichita with relatives while his parents worked. He became lonely and secretive. Even as a boy, he showed disturbing behaviors, cruelty to animals, cross-dressing in secret, and spying on neighbors. Yet he kept a respectable public face. He dropped out of high school after a year, later joined the U.S. Air Force, and gained technical skills he would later misuse. After military service, he moved to Park City, married Paula Dietz, and held jobs that made him seem ordinary, even respectable. Ironically, he worked for a security firm installing alarm systems for people terrified of beat. While in private, he was the very monster they feared. By 1991, Rader was a prominent community figure, a church council member, and the local animal control officer. Neighbors later recalled, he used that position to harass single women, and some even sought restraining orders. Finally, in February 2005, after decades of terror, he was brought to trial. Prosecutors laid out the sequence of brutal, premeditated killings from 1974 to 1991. 10 innocent victims, most defenseless women, chosen and murdered solely to satisfy his perverse desires. The evidence included photographs, bindings, and the mask he wore. Rader admitted guilt and even spent a half hour addressing the victims, families in court, words that rang hollow against the scale of his crime stacked against the floor. Producing a hollow sound, the guard frowned. Sensing something unusual, he crouched down and struck the slab again. This time harder. The sound echoed, suspicious. He ordered the prisoners to move aside and began inspecting the stove within moments. He discovered the cleverly disguised cement cover when the guards pried it open. They were stunned to find the entrance of a tunnel right beneath their feet. Roger's men had been careful, but even the best laid plans can't account for pure bad luck. The discovery of Tunnel Tom sent shockwaves through the camp. The guards immediately swarmed the hut, arrested the men inside, and launched a full-scale investigation. Every building was searched, every fireplace and drain inspected, but because of how well hidden the other entrances were, they found nothing else. Tom had been compromised, but Harry and David were still safe. The Leadership Council held an emergency meeting. They knew the Germans would increase security and surveillance, so work on the tunnels had to be paused for several weeks in the meantime. The prisoners shifted tactics. They pretended to carry on with daily life as usual, attending roll calls, performing chores, even joking with the guards to convince them that the discovery had destroyed all morale behind the scenes. However, they secretly resumed digging, focusing all their efforts on Harry Tunnel. Harry was the most promising. It was the deepest, the longest, and the most stable of the three. By early 1944, it stretched over 100 meters, running far beyond the perimeter fence and into the dense forest outside every day. A small team of men worked in 12-hour shifts, crawling through the cramped space to reinforce the walls, lay wooden boards, and install a small air pump made from old tin cans and rubber tubing scavenged from the camp. Workshop ventilation was crucial. Without it, the diggers could easily suffocate underground meat. The Leadership Council organized the escape lineup. They had to decide who would go first. The plan was for 200 prisoners to escape through Harry, but space and time made that goal nearly impossible after long debates. Roger and his council finalized a list of 76 men to attempt the breakout. Each man received forged documents, civilian clothing sewn from blankets, and fake papers printed using ink made from crushed berries and soot. Everything was ready on the night of March 24, 1944. The operation began under the cover of darkness. The first man climbed into the fireplace entrance and crawled through the tunnel. Everything went smoothly until he reached the end and made a horrifying discovery. The exit was not as deep inside the forest as they had expected. It opened up several meters short of the tree line. In a clearing faintly illuminated by floodlights from the camp, it was a fatal miscalculation still. With no other choice, the men pressed on one by one. They crawled through the tunnel, waited for the signal from the lookout near the exit, and sprinted into the woods for the first hour. Everything went according to plan, but then disaster struck around 5 a.m. One of the guards spotted footprints in the snow leading away from the fence. The alarm blared through the camp. Chaos erupted. Searchlights swept across the compound. Dogs barked furiously, and soldiers poured out to block every path. Only 76 prisoners managed to escape through the tunnel before it was discovered within hours. German troops, Gestapo agents, and police swarmed the surrounding area, launching one of the largest manhunts of the war in the days that followed. Most of the escapees were captured. Some were caught trying to board trains. Others, while hiding in barns, were walking along rural roads. In total, only 3 men made it safely to freedom. 2 reached Sweden, and 1 escaped all the way to Spain. The other 73 were recaptured, and in a chilling act of revenge, Hitler personally ordered that 50 of them be executed by the Gestapo. A direct violation of the Geneva Convention. Roger Bushell was among those executed. His plan had not achieved its intended result, but his defiance left an indelible mark. The escape from Stalag, Luft 3, later known as the Great Escape, became one of the most legendary stories of courage and resistance in wartime history. Though only 3 men made it out alive, Their daring inspired countless others. Roger Bushell's name endures as the man who, even in the darkest depths of captivity, refused to surrender his will to be free. Guard's stick slipped and struck the cement slab by the stove. A sharp rap that cracked the cover. Curious. He hit it again. Harder. The hollow sound put him on alert. He ordered the prisoners aside, moved the stove, and uncovered the cleverly concealed entrance to Tunnel Tom. Within moments the hut was sealed. Men were hauled away, and explosives were used to destroy the passage. That destruction was, perversely, exactly what Roger Bushell had counted on when he ordered 3 tunnels instead of 1. The Germans, seeing the massive effort poured into Tom, assumed it was the prisoners' sole project, and relaxed their vigilance, convinced the threat had been eliminated. But another complication emerged. The camp expansion sliced through the planned exit 4 tunnel. David trees were felled and cover removed, so David could no longer open into the forest as intended. The council halted work on David and repurposed it as the dumping ground for spoil from the remaining tunnel. All resources were redirected toward Tunnel Harry. The prisoners improvised an air duct from condensed milk tins and rubber tubing, used canvas bags as bellows, and built a small hand pump to keep fresh air moving through the shaft. They laid a crude track and wheeled carts in and out to haul excavated soil and move workers, a necessity. Once the tunnel stretched well over 100 meters and space became cramped for lighting, they stole wires and bulbs from civilian work crews and secretly wired lamps along the passage. Forged documents and civilian clothes were prepared by talented forgers working from smuggled inks and stolen papers, but photographs and official stamps were still held in guard files. The prisoners used a subtler pressure. Master pickpockets and social engineers would create small crises for guards, lost keys, the threat of a report, then quietly extract the needed photos, stamps, and materials. Fear of punishment or of being sent to the front lines made some guards comply. By March 1944, after more than a year of painstaking, covert work, Harry was finished. Everything was in place for the mass breakout. The tunnel, the ventilation, the rail, the clothes, the papers. Only the timing remained. They would not try on a full moon, knowing moonlight could betray the millions of comments within just hours. The footage allegedly featured several well-known public figures, among them influential entrepreneurs, online celebrities, and even a few government officials. What made it more shocking was how detailed and high quality the videos appeared. The scenes were filmed in what looked like luxury hotel suites and private residences, with crystal clear audio and multiple camera angles, leaving viewers stunned by their apparent authenticity. However, within a day, the narrative began to shift. Cybersecurity experts noticed something odd about the videos. The faces seemed too perfect, the expressions slightly off, the lighting mismatched with body movements. Analysts soon confirmed that the videos were not real at all, but sophisticated created using AI-generated face-swapping technology so advanced that even trained investigators had difficulty distinguishing them from genuine footage. The investigation that followed traced the origin of the uploads to anonymous accounts hosted on foreign servers, rapidly deleted after the content went viral. Chinese authorities immediately launched a cyber forensics operation, calling it one of the most complex digital manhunts in recent years. The Ministry of Public Security warned that these videos weren't random scandals, but part of a coordinated disinformation campaign designed to erode public trust and damage reputations. As speculation spread, so did panic. Anyone with an online presence began to fear they might be next. Influencers deleted old posts, entrepreneurs shut down accounts, and even state-affiliated figures publicly condemned the abuse of AI technology. It wasn't long before tech experts revealed a chilling detail. The fakes had been trained using scraped footage from interviews and even security cameras, processed by neural networks capable of generating near-flawless realism. The incident reignited debates worldwide about AI regulation, digital ethics, and personal privacy, with calls for international cooperation to combat synthetic media misuse. China soon announced emergency measures to track deepfake production software and tighten control over generative AI platforms. The story, however, was far from over, as new fragments surfaced online. Investigators discovered that some of the fake videos were embedded with digital watermarks, linked to an underground cybercrime syndicate, known for data extortion and political manipulation. What began as an online scandal had now evolved into a full-scale digital warfare mystery, one that revealed just how fragile the line between reality and fabrication had become. In the age of AI, after gathering all the evidence, investigators reached a chilling conclusion. The person behind the account, Hongji, was not a woman at all, but a middle-aged man who had been living in the same Nanjing apartment for years. The shocking truth was that this man had meticulously crafted an online persona, pretending to be a kind, affectionate woman, using photos stolen from social media to lure victims into his web of deceit. Every conversation, every expression of tenderness had been part of a calculated plan. The man used emotional manipulation to build trust, guiding his victims into visiting him in person, always under the pretense of a romantic encounter. Once there, they would unknowingly enter the same dimly lit room seen in the viral videos, unaware that a hidden camera had already been set up to record everything. The more investigators uncovered, the clearer the scale of the operation became. The man had deceived 1,691 victims over several years, a number so large that even seasoned detectives were stunned. Each victim had not only lost money, but had also been humiliated and emotionally scarred, many discovering their private moments exposed online. What made the case even more disturbing was the level of organization behind it. The suspect had stored thousands of video files, carefully labeled and cataloged by date and victim number. It wasn't just a scam, it was a system, an industrial-scale manipulation of human emotion and desire. Forensic experts later revealed that the man had used multiple phones and SIM cards to maintain his false identity. Switching accounts frequently to avoid detection, he would alter his voice using audio filters and communicate through carefully scripted messages that made his persona seem genuine. When the police finally stormed his apartment, they found the tiny room exactly as it appeared in the leaked clips: a single bed, cheap lighting, stacks of cooking oil containers, fruit boxes, and a laptop still running chat windows under the name Hongji. Dozens of hard drives containing explicit footage were seized on the spot. The suspect, identified as Kim Min, initially refused to cooperate, maintaining an emotionless expression as he was interrogated. But as the evidence piled up, hundreds of gigabytes of recordings, fake IDs, and financial records of online transfers, there was no longer any doubt. The gentle middle-aged woman named Hongji never existed. It had all been the creation of one man, a manipulator who exploited loneliness, trust, and vulnerability on a massive scale. The revelation sent shockwaves through China and beyond, raising haunting questions about online anonymity, emotional exploitation, and how eerie technology can blur the lines between illusion and reality. Based on sufficient preliminary evidence, the investigative team decided to carry out a covert and unexpected arrest operation to prevent the suspect from destroying key evidence. A group of detectives, disguised as delivery workers, approached the target apartment in the early morning, precisely the time they expected the suspect to be home and preparing for the day. At exactly 5 a.m., when the suspect was known to wake up, police quietly surrounded the building and pressed the doorbell, pretending to make a routine delivery. The moment the door opened slightly, officers burst in and swiftly restrained the suspect. The arrest happened smoothly and without resistance, as the man was completely taken by surprise. What shocked the investigators was the suspect's state. At the time, he was still wearing women's clothing, a wig half removed, and makeup only halfway done. The sight left no doubt. This was a well-practiced impersonation. carefully maintained over time inside the small apartment. Officers found an extraordinary scene. Rotting fruit boxes littered the floor with withered grapes, spoiled cherries filling the room with a foul odor in one corner. Dozens of large cooking oil containers were stacked in high piles after counting. Police confirmed 47 containers in total, occupying nearly the entire balcony, and that was only what the cramped apartment could hold. The sheer volume of gifts revealed how many visitors had come through. Over time, scattered among the clutter were lavish presents. Giant flower bouquets, one reportedly weighing 110 pounds after the beauty bragged about homemade dumplings, expensive imported liquor, and even a bulky treadmill. All were offerings from men eager to win the affection of the person they believed was a young woman. But beyond the physical evidence, the digital findings were even more staggering. On multiple laptops and phones, police discovered a meticulously organized archive, over 1,600 video clips, each documenting a different encounter, all recorded from the same fixed camera angle. Every visitor had been filmed from start to finish. Far more disturbing was the suspect's lover's notebook, where he had recorded each man's name, age, preferences, and unique habits, complete with photographs. Some names appeared repeatedly, annotated with notes like regular visitor, met 2 to 3 times. This proved that many men not only fell for the deception, but continued returning even after learning the truth, forming bizarre long-term relationships with the impersonator. During later questioning, some victims admitted that upon discovering Hongji was male, they did not feel anger. Instead, they experienced a strange fascination and kept returning with new gifts: fruit, rice, cooking oil. Others reacted very differently. Some panicked, fled, or froze in shock when they realized something was wrong. A few, caught in hidden camera footage, displayed disbelief and confusion, but still chose to go through with the encounter, rationalizing that they had already come this far by the time investigators finished collecting evidence. The entire pattern of deception was undeniable. The suspect was taken to headquarters for formal questioning, where his true identity, Hongji's real name and background, was finally confirmed through official documents. The suspect's true name was Xiaoji, a 38-year-old man, a revelation that sharply contradicted the online rumors describing him as a 60-year-old retiree. The discovery of his real age and background came as a surprise, even to the investigative team. Authorities were soon forced to issue a correction, clarifying that the suspect was not a Nanjing local, but had relocated there from another province several years earlier. This web of disguise and misinformation had thoroughly deceived the public, shaping a false image of the perpetrator, until the official announcement shattered all previous assumptions. In parallel with the investigation, Chinese authorities released a strict warning to internet users regarding the spread of explicit videos. Tied to the case, a major state newspaper reminded the public that sharing or even possessing such content, especially clips that revealed victims' faces, constituted a serious invasion of privacy and could legally be classified as the distribution of obscene material under Chinese law. The warning came after a wave of curiosity-driven sharing across social media, where users had circulated clips to understand the truth, not realizing they were unintentionally becoming accomplices in disseminating illegal content. Officials cautioned that anyone found storing or distributing the videos could face up to 2 years in prison. The measure was intended to curb the spread of the footage, protect victims' dignity, and prevent the scandal from turning into a grotesque form of online entertainment. Thanks to swift and coordinated police action, the suspect was captured within 48 hours of the story breaking. Subsequent analysis of the evidence ruled out the involvement of accomplices or any organized network. Every stage, from creating fake accounts to filming and distributing the clips, had been carried out by Zhao alone. With his arrest, investigators began to piece together the full psychological and personal background behind the deception. Zhao, born in 1987, had lived a quiet and solitary life in a small rented apartment. He had retired early and spent most of his time alone, leading neighbors to assume he was simply a gentle, soft-spoken woman. He always appeared in public, with a feminine appearance and a delicate voice, so convincingly that even the building's janitor described him fondly as a kind young lady who always shared fruit. No one could have imagined that the friendly woman was, in reality, a man hiding behind an elaborate facade in terms of family. Xiao had once been married and had a son, but his wife had passed away years earlier, leaving him to live alone. His son had since moved abroad, and Xiao's isolated lifestyle deepened over time. Neighbors noted that he rarely spoke to anyone and never received visitors, a pattern investigators later connected to his growing psychological detachment and loneliness during interrogation. Xiao confessed that the years of silence after losing his family had created an unbearable emptiness. Each evening he returned to his apartment, greeted only by the stillness of his own thoughts. To escape this crushing solitude, he began experimenting online, impersonating a woman as a way to feel wanted and connected. At first, he claimed it was merely a harmless fantasy to soothe his loneliness, but it gradually evolved into something much darker. That was when he created the persona Hong Shia, a fictional 30 woman described as gentle, unlucky in love, and yearning for a sincere partner. The account's profile photo showed a strikingly beautiful woman, pale skin, large expressive eyes, and soft red lips. In reality, this was Xiao himself, heavily edited through beauty filters, skin and facial reshaping apps until his masculine features were completely erased. His self-introduction read, divorced and currently living alone, hoping to meet someone sincere. The combination of vulnerability and allure made Hong Shia instantly popular on dating platforms and chat forums. Xiao spent long hours each day live streaming and chatting, completely immersed in his female persona, his voice sweet, his gestures refined, his performance flawless. It was this uncanny skill at imitation that would soon attract not just attention, but obsession, setting the stage for one of the strangest romance scams the city had ever seen. Change his identity, however. As time passed, this initial motive of emotional fulfillment gradually transformed into something darker. Once Xiao realized how easily men fell for his fabricated persona, and how much admiration, gifts, and validation he could extract, his loneliness gave way to addiction and greed. What began as emotional escapism evolved into a carefully crafted system of manipulation, driven by both psychological satisfaction and material gain. Through his online persona, Hong Xiao mastered the art of emotional entrapment. He spoke softly, laughed delicately, and created an aura of vulnerability that pulled people in. His messages were simple, yet irresistibly intimate. I just finished cooking braised pork today. Does anyone want to come eat with me? I bought a new dress. Do you think it looks good on me? These small, domestic updates, perfectly matching the image of a gentle, feminine woman, gave Hangsha a sense of authenticity and warmth. She wasn't some distant internet idol. She was real, approachable, and lonely. It was this realism that captured so many hearts as his popularity grew. Zhao's streams often drew hundreds of viewers. Young men competed to send virtual gifts and compliments, enchanted by his charm, and whenever suspicion arose, Xiao would instantly shift tone, becoming sad, withdrawn, or hurt, saying things like, "If you don't trust me, maybe I shouldn't talk to you anymore." That emotional guilt tactic worked every time. The men would rush to apologize, showering him with reassurance and affection. Psychologists later remarked that Zhao's manipulation techniques demonstrated a deep understanding of human vulnerability, particularly men's instinctive desire to protect a fragile, emotional woman. After weeks or months of chatting, Xiao would propose a meeting. Yet, unlike typical scams, he never directly asked for money. Instead, he subtly suggested that when visiting a woman for the first time, it's polite to bring a small gift, perhaps fruit, cooking oil, or something symbolic. This seemingly innocent suggestion disarmed suspicion, allowing men to believe the relationship was pure and sincere. According to Chinese media, this approach, appealing to emotional sincerity instead of greed, was precisely what made his deception so effective. He sold affection, not a service, one paper noted, and that made the trap irresistible. As the investigation progressed, experts began examining Xiao's mental condition. While no official psychiatric diagnosis was released, analysts speculated he might suffer from a personality disorder or transvestic tendencies, finding pleasure in adopting a female identity or deceiving others. Yet, psychologists emphasized that Xiao remained fully aware of his wrongdoing. His secret recordings, encrypted file storage, and cautious behavior proved his actions were deliberate and premeditated, not the product of delusion or insanity. The notion of diminished responsibility due to mental illness was dismissed. Experts concluded that the crime stemmed from a blend of psychological distortion, emotional dependency, and conscious greed. Xiao had rationally planned each step, from disguise and online persona to emotional manipulation and illegal filming, all executed with cold calculation beneath the mask of loneliness. During interrogation, he tried to evoke sympathy, claiming he only wanted to find comfort in friendship after losing his wife and living apart from his son. But investigators firmly rejected this narrative. They confronted him with the overwhelming evidence, thousands of clips, secret recordings, and the systematic way he profited from his victims. If his goal was truly companionship, they argued, he wouldn't have recorded, archived, and distributed intimate footage. Confronted with this undeniable truth, Xiao fell silent. Witnesses described him lowering his head, trembling, finally uttering no defense, as though the realization had struck him all at once that his search for affection had turned into exploitation, and his desire for love had consumed every trace of humanity he once had. Palace later summarized the case with chilling precision. The first motive was loneliness, the second was greed, and between them lies the moment when sympathy turned into crime. Change his gender identity to achieve this goal. However, over time, a second, darker motive emerged, one rooted not in loneliness but in greed and exploitation. Xiao began to realize that his fabricated relationships could yield tangible rewards. The benefits he sought came in two forms: material through the gifts, money, and items his visitors brought, and financial through his secret recordings, which he later distributed online for profit while also indulging his own twisted desires by uploading explicit videos without consent. Zhao had crossed the line from emotional manipulation into criminal exploitation, preying on both his victims and the broader online audience. His actions were no longer the desperate acts of a lonely man, but those of a calculated profiteer who commodified intimacy and trust. This shift in motive made the crime far more severe and deserving of strong condemnation than his initial narrative of isolation and grief. As for his victims, the college student mentioned earlier was just one of 1,691 individuals ensnared in this massive deception. Police investigation files revealed a staggering diversity among them, from university students and white-collar professionals to fitness trainers and even married men. Despite their different backgrounds, they all fell for the same illusion: a mature, kind, and lonely woman seeking genuine companionship. The victims' emotional responses, once the truth came to light, were as complex as they were tragic. Some were horrified and humiliated, their sense of dignity shattered. Others reacted with anger, reporting the crime to authorities. Yet disturbingly, a number of men were curious or strangely intrigued, eventually choosing to continue contact even after discovering the deception. Investigators noted that many victims shared similar vulnerabilities. Younger men, with little experience in relationships, were drawn in by the sweetness of apparent sincerity. Others, particularly married men, sought excitement without financial risk, making them easy targets for what they perceived as free love. But regardless of intent, every single one became a victim of manipulation, privacy violation, and public exposure once their most intimate moments were secretly filmed and shared online. The number 1691 thus came to represent 1691 individual tragedies, each one a story of humiliation, betrayal, and shame. It was a record-breaking figure, shocking not only for its sheer scale, but also for the bizarre and unprecedented nature of the crime itself. Found July 7, 2025, Nanjing police officially announced the arrest of the suspect, Xiao, also known as Hong Shia, on charges of fraud and distribution of obscene materials. Authorities labeled the case as one of the most serious and complex of its kind, requiring further investigation to identify all victims, verify the full scope of Zhao's actions, and determine additional criminal factors involved. As of now, Xiao remains in detention, awaiting the completion of the investigative process and the preparation of prosecution documents for formal trial. In the aftermath, the case has become a sobering lesson and a nationwide warning. It underscores that anyone, regardless of gender, age, or background, can fall prey to romance scams. The incident highlights the urgent need to raise public awareness, especially among young people, about the dangers of online relationships that seem to perfect. Experts emphasize that curiosity, loneliness, and desire for connection can easily be exploited by those with malicious intent. The key to prevention lies in skepticism and self-protection, maintaining clear judgment when confronted with unrealistic promises, and remembering that anything appearing too good to be true usually is story. 4. The case of Sierra Joganin, the small, peaceful village of Metamora, Ohio, lived 20-year-old Sierra Joganin, a student at the University of Toledo's Junior College of Business. Her family described her as impossible to miss. Loud, lively, and full of personality, Sierra was the eldest of 5 children and shared an especially close bond with her mother, Sheila. She could never sit still. Her mother recalled there was always laughter when Sierra was around, even as a teenager. Sierra was the type to make others laugh at her own expense, once dancing through school in a cheerleader's uniform just to entertain her friends. Despite not being on the team, it was back in high school, at just 13 years old, that she met Josh Kaczynski, her first and only love. What began as innocent young romance blossomed over the years into a deep, enduring relationship. 7 years later, the couple were still inseparable and had begun discussing marriage. After college, they shared everything: a passion for sports, the outdoors, and travel. Josh often joked that Sierra's strong will made it impossible to win arguments with her. She was independent, confident, and once she set her mind on something, there was no stopping her. He said her aunt, Tara, described her as someone who could light up any room. Even introverted people opened up around her. She said you could take her anywhere and she'd make a new friend within minutes. On July 19, 2016, at around 6:30 p.m., Sierra and Josh decided to take advantage of Metamora's winding country roads and beautiful scenery for a quiet evening drive, a peaceful outing that would soon take a devastating and unexpected turn. You always made sure to stay away. The locals described James Worley as the type of man who gave off an uneasy feeling, someone who always seemed to be watching, even when pretending not to. He lived alone, isolated, and his rundown property looked as neglected as his social reputation. Police soon discovered that Worley wasn't new to law enforcement. Back in 1990, he had been convicted of abducting a woman who was riding her bike, an eerie parallel to Sierra's case in that earlier crime. The victim had fought back and managed to escape, leading to Worley's arrest and a short prison sentence. It was clear to investigators that this was not a coincidence. Armed with this new information, authorities quickly obtained a search warrant for his property when they entered his barn and outbuildings. What they found shocked even the most seasoned investigators. Hidden inside were chains, restraints, handcuffs, a freezer, and a secret room fitted with a bed, restraints, and a video camera. There was also a stash of women's clothing and lingerie, none of which matched anything belonging to Sierra. It looked less like a workshop and more like a makeshift dungeon. As forensic teams scoured the area, they found a plastic bag containing a bloody motorcycle helmet, matching the one recovered earlier, and several items of Sierra's clothing buried under hay in one of the barns. The grim discovery left little doubt about what had happened then, just 3 days after she vanished. Sierra's body was found in a cornfield less than a mile from Worley's property. She had been bound and gagged, her cause of death determined to be asphyxiation. Investigators said the evidence pointed to a violent struggle and premeditated attack when police confronted Worley. His demeanor changed from arrogance to defensiveness. He stuck to his earlier story that his bike had broken down and he had just happened to be near the spot where Sierra disappeared, but the DNA evidence told another story. Sierra's blood and DNA were found on his motorcycle and helmet, and his fingerprints were on the zip ties used to bind her. The community of Metamora was devastated for days. Hundreds had volunteered to search for Sierra, hoping to bring her home safely. Now that hope was gone. Her mother, Sheila, described her daughter as a light that filled every room, saying that no one should ever have to experience what she did during the trial. Prosecutors painted a harrowing picture of a man who had been planning to abduct and harm someone for years, keeping his tools ready for the right opportunity. They revealed that Worley had kept a journal with one chilling entry that read, "If you ever catch a woman, don't let her go." That single sentence captured the depth of his evil. The jury found James Worley guilty of aggravated murder, kidnapping, and abuse of a corpse in 2018. He was sentenced to death, a punishment that brought some closure to Sierra's loved ones, but could never erase their pain. Her boyfriend Josh later said, "I replay that night every single day. If I had just stayed a few more minutes, maybe she'd still be here." The tragic story of Sierra Joan became a nationwide warning, a reminder that evil can hide in plain sight, even in the most peaceful of places. But the mountain of evidence against him was overwhelming. The trial began in early 2018, drawing massive media attention across Ohio. Prosecutors described James Worley as a predator who had been waiting for his chance, a man who had turned his property into a trap built for torture. They presented photographs of the barn, the freezer buried in the ground, and the handwritten note in which he had written chillingly, "Each abduction is a lesson. The next one will not get away." That single line shattered any doubt about premeditation. Experts testified that Sierra's blood had been found on the mattress inside the barn, and that fibers from the ropes binding her body matched those recovered from Worley's property. DNA from under Sierra's fingernails also matched his, confirming that she had fought desperately for her life throughout the trial. Worley remained cold and expressionless at times. He even smirked during testimony, something that infuriated Sierra's family. Prosecutors said his behavior revealed the true nature of a man who felt no remorse, only control. The defense tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial, suggesting Sierra's death might have been accidental or unrelated to him. But their case quickly fell apart when digital evidence was introduced. Worley's cell phone had pinged multiple times in the exact area where Sierra vanished, and his Google search history showed terms like abduction movies, hogtie techniques, and how long does it take to suffocate someone. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours before returning with a verdict, guilty on all 19 counts. When the judge read the verdict, Sierra's family broke down in tears, holding hands tightly. Her mother, Sheila, said later, "We finally got justice for Sierra, but there's no joy in this. Just relief that he can never hurt anyone else." In March 2018, James Worley was sentenced to death. The judge called his crimes the purest form of evil, calculated, cruel, and beyond redemption. After the verdict, Sierra's boyfriend Josh said quietly to reporters, "I still see her every night when I close my eyes on that bike, smiling, waving goodbye. I just wish I hadn't let her go." The case left an entire community haunted for many in Metamora. The roads where Sierra once rode her bike are now symbols of loss and warning, reminders that danger can hide behind the most ordinary faces and the most peaceful places. A small white cross still stands by the side of the road where her bike was found. It's decorated with purple flowers, the same color as her beloved bicycle, a memorial for a bright, fearless young woman whose life was stolen by a man who had once promised he'd learned his lesson, but never truly had his execution was later delayed following multiple appeals. Worley's lawyers filed motion after motion, arguing procedural errors, mental instability, and ineffective counsel, but each time, the courts upheld the original ruling. The evidence was too strong, too damning, and too consistent with his violent history to suggest anything other than guilt. In the years that followed, Sierra's family continued to attend every hearing, determined not to let her memory fade. Her mother, Sheila, said, "He's still breathing, but my daughter isn't as long as I'm alive. I'll fight to make sure her story is never forgotten." Meanwhile, remained defiant from his cell. He sent rambling letters maintaining his innocence, claiming that the police had planted evidence and that he was the victim of a government conspiracy. But even his own appeals attorneys admitted that the likelihood of overturning his sentence was virtually non-existent. The death sentence was formally upheld by the Ohio Supreme Court in 2022, with the Chief Justice calling Worley's actions a deliberate and monstrous crime driven by cruelty, not confusion. As for Sierra's legacy, her friends, family, and classmates established the Sierra Joggin Memorial Scholarship Fund, which helps young women in Ohio pursue higher education safely and confidently, something Sierra herself had dreamed of doing after college every July. The community of Metamora gathers for a bike ride in her honor, hundreds of people pedaling down the same roads she once rode, dressed in her favorite color, purple. Sierra's mother always leads the ride, she said. "We ride for her. We ride for every young woman who never made it home. We can't change what happened, but we can make sure no one ever forgets her name." And as for James Worley, the man who turned his barn into a chamber of horror, he now sits on death row, waiting for the day his sentence is carried out. A man who once promised after his first attack that he'd learned his lesson, but instead proved that monsters don't change, they just get better at hiding. In the end, justice caught up with him, and Sierra's light, though cruelly extinguished, continues to shine brighter than his darkness ever could. Fun, and Mia never missed an opportunity to take part. She was bright, beautiful, and full of life. The kind of person who made even an ordinary day feel exciting, but that energy and openness that drew people in would also, tragically, place her in the path of someone who saw that light and wanted to take it away. Was the summer of 2021, and Mia was 19, confident, happy, and exploring her independence. She had recently started working part-time while attending classes, and on the evening of July 17th, she told her mom she was heading out to meet some friends when she didn't come home that night. Her family immediately knew something was wrong. Mia was responsible and always checked in. She wasn't the type to vanish or go off-grid without letting someone know the next morning. When her phone went straight to voicemail, panic set in. Her family reported her missing, and soon after, local police began an intensive search. Detectives traced her phone activity and found her last known location was near a shopping plaza just outside Orlando. Surveillance footage revealed her talking with a man in the parking lot before walking toward his car. That was the last time she was seen alive. The man in question was 28-year-old Eric Denton, someone Mia had met briefly through mutual acquaintances. He had a history of erratic behavior and several prior arrests for domestic disputes, but nothing that had yet landed him in serious trouble. Investigators quickly identified him as a person of interest, and when they searched his apartment, what they found was chilling. Inside his garage, police discovered traces of blood later confirmed to be Mia's. They also recovered her phone, a piece of her jewelry, and a set of zip ties. Eric initially denied knowing where Mia was, claiming they had just talked for a few minutes before parting ways, but when confronted with the forensic evidence, his story began to fall apart. 2 days later, Mia's body was found in a wooded area behind an abandoned lot, just 5 miles from where she was last seen. The medical examiner ruled her death a homicide, citing blunt force trauma and strangulation. When the news broke, the community was devastated. Hundreds attended candlelight vigils and left flowers, notes, and photos at makeshift memorials near where she was found. Her mother, Marlon, said through tears, "Mia was my sunshine. She was fearless, kind, and had dreams so big they filled every room now. Our world is empty without her." Eric Denton was charged with first-degree murder, kidnapping, and tampering with evidence during his trial. Prosecutors described him as a manipulative predator who fixated on Mia after she rejected his advances. His defense argued he suffered from mental illness, but the jury was unconvinced. After just 4 hours of deliberation, they returned a unanimous verdict: guilty on all counts in court. Mia's brother Munchie stood before the judge and said, "You didn't just kill my sister, you killed the light in our family, but I promise you, she'll never be forgotten." Eric Denton was sentenced to life in prison without parole today. Mia's family honors her through the Mia Marano Foundation, which offers scholarships to young women studying art and physical therapy, the two passions Mia held closest each year. On her birthday, friends and family gather at the beach for a lantern release. They call it Light for Mia, her mother said. "The world feels dimmer without her, but when those lanterns rise, I see her free, beautiful, and still shining above us." Wasn't long before his story started to crumble. Investigators soon realized that several of his claims didn't add up. For starters, phone records showed that he had seen her that very morning at 8:30 a.m. Armando had used his master maintenance key fob to access Mia's apartment just 30 minutes before she was last seen alive. This was a key piece of evidence, because only maintenance workers had those master keys, and every entry was logged electronically. When police checked the security footage from the complex, there it was, Armando entering Mia's building. He stayed there for roughly 20 minutes. After that, he was seen carrying a large black bag and walking back out toward his car the next day. The Orlando Police Department declared Mia's case a critical missing person investigation. They quickly obtained a warrant to search Armando's car, and what they found left no room for doubt. In the back seat, wrapped in a pink blanket, were traces of blood later confirmed to belong to Mia. They also found the same yellow box cutter that had been spotted in her room when officers went to detain him for questioning. It was already too late. Around 10:30 a.m. that morning, Armando was found dead in his apartment. From a self-inflicted gunshot wound on the wall beside him was a handwritten note, apologizing to Mia's family. A few hours later, a K-9 unit located Mia's body in a wooded area near Orlando's Timberscan Apartments, about 20 miles away from where she lived. She had been wrapped in that same pink blanket. The news devastated her family and the entire Orlando community. Mia's father, Marlon, said through tears, "We trusted that place. We trusted the people who worked there. My daughter was supposed to be safe." Her brother, Munchie, later said, "He took away my best friend, my sister. She didn't deserve this." In the aftermath, questions swirled about how this could have happened. How a man with a documented history of harassment and disturbing behavior had managed to keep his job with full access to residents' apartments. An internal review of the Art and Villas complex revealed shocking gaps in screening and reporting. Armando had been accused of harassment at a previous complex, but no formal report was filed, allowing him to continue working elsewhere without issue. Mia's family made it their mission to ensure no one else would go through what they had. They established the Mia Marcano Foundation, dedicated to improving tenant safety, enforcing background checks for maintenance workers, and advocating for laws that protect residents from predatory behavior. Their efforts led to the creation of Mia's Law, officially signed into Florida legislation in June 2022. The law requires apartment complexes to conduct nationwide background checks on all employees, maintain strict key control logs, and give tenants advance notice before anyone enters their units every year since her passing. Mia's family and friends gather at a memorial garden built in her honor in Pembroke Pines. Her mother, Emma, said, "We miss her every second of every day. But through this law and this foundation, Mia's light will keep protecting others." That's who she was. She always wanted to help. The tragedy of what happened to Mia Marcano exposed how easily safety can be taken for granted and how one person's obsession can destroy countless lives, but her family's strength and determination turned unimaginable pain into lasting change, ensuring Mia's name will forever stand for protection, justice, and love. That call would change everything. It was just after 10:30 a.m. on September 27, 2021, when Seminole County deputies received a report of a man found unresponsive inside his apartment. The man was quickly identified as 27-year-old Armando Caballero, the very person police had just named as the prime suspect in Mia Marcano's disappearance. When deputies entered the apartment, they found him hanging from a belt in his garage nearby. On a small table was a handwritten note. It was short and cryptic, but one line stood out: "I'm sorry to Mia's family." The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation. While detectives had suspected Armando from the beginning, his sudden death meant that key answers might have died with him still. Investigators refused to give up hope that Mia might be found alive somewhere. Search teams immediately zeroed in on areas linked to Armando, places he frequented, routes his car had traveled, and any locations his phone had pinged. In the days following Mia's disappearance, they combed through parks, lakes, and wooded areas, searching for any clue for 4 agonizing days. Her family and hundreds of volunteers scoured Central Florida. Her father, Marlon, refused to leave the search area. Sleeping in his car near the complex, he told reporters through tears, "I'm not leaving without my daughter. I promised I'd bring her home then." On October 2nd, at around 10:45 a.m., the search came to its tragic end. A maintenance worker discovered human remains near the timber scan on the Lake Apartments, about 18 miles from where Mia had lived. Authorities confirmed that personal items found nearby, including a purse with Mia's identification, belonged to her. Later that evening, the Orange County Sheriff's Office officially announced, "It is with a heavy heart that we announce the body found near Timberscan Apartments has been identified as 19-year-old Mia Marcano. Her cause of death was determined to be homicide by asphyxiation. She had been bound with duct tape, and traces of her DNA were found on items recovered from Armando's car and apartment." The heartbreak that followed rippled across Florida and the entire country. Mia's family, who had held on to hope for over a week, now faced the unbearable reality that their daughter, the vibrant, creative, ambitious young woman who had just started building her life, was gone. Her father said softly at the vigil, "Mia didn't deserve this. She was light, she was love, she trusted people. And that's what makes this so painful." As public outrage grew, questions were raised about how a convicted felon with a history of violent behavior had been allowed unrestricted access to residents' apartments. Investigations later revealed serious lapses in background checks and poor regulation of master key access in Florida's rental housing industry. This led directly to the creation of Mia's Law, which was passed unanimously in 2022. The law now requires comprehensive background checks for all apartment employees, strict key control procedures, logging every instance a master key is used, mandatory notice to tenants before anyone enters their unit. In addition, the Mia Marcano Foundation was founded by her family to promote tenant safety, empower young women through self-defense training, and raise awareness about domestic and workplace harassment. Each year, friends and family gather at Mia's Garden Memorial in Pembroke Pines to celebrate her life with music, flowers, and dancing, the things she loved most. Her mother, Emma said it best. They tried to take her voice, but her name will keep speaking for others through this law. Through this foundation, Mia will keep saving lives, though her story ended far too soon. Mia Marcano's legacy has become one of protection, empowerment, and change, ensuring no one else will have to suffer the same fate. In silence, police tracked Armando's phone and located his last known signal near a wooded area around the Timberscan apartments, roughly 20 minutes from where Mia lived when officers arrived. They discovered Armando's black Ford Fusion parked nearby. Inside, they found a handgun, several personal items, and a note. The letter was short and chilling. It contained an apology to his family, an admission that he had done something terrible, and ended with the words, "I can't live with what I've done." Moments later, about 50 yards from the car, deputies found Armando Caballero dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound, even though it looked like the end of the road for Armando. Detectives knew the case was far from over. Because Mia was still missing, search teams expanded the search area, deploying dogs, drones, and volunteers. Family and friends refused to give up hope for days. The search continued across Orange County. Then, on October 2nd, at around 10:45 a.m., a tragic discovery was made. A maintenance worker reported a strange odor coming from a wooded area near the complex where Armando's phone had last pinged. Investigators arrived on the scene, and within minutes, their worst fears were confirmed. They had found human remains. A red shirt and black jeans matched the description of what Mia had been wearing the day she disappeared. Later that evening, the Orange County Sheriff's Office made the heartbreaking announcement. DNA confirmed that the remains belonged to 19-year-old Mia Autopsy later revealed she had been bound and gagged with duct tape. There were no signs of sexual assault, but the cause of death was ruled as homicide by asphyxiation. The evidence inside Armando's car, along with his access records to her apartment, made it clear Mia had likely been ambushed when she returned home that afternoon. The entire state of Florida was shaken. Students held candlelight vigils, and news stations across the country covered the case. Mia's father, Marlon Marcano, said, "My heart will never be whole again. She was my baby girl. She trusted people too much, and one of those people took her from us." In the months that followed, the tragedy of Mia Marcano led to legislative change. Florida passed the Mia Marcano Act, requiring apartment complexes to conduct stricter background checks on employees, especially maintenance workers, and to create digital logs for all master key fob entries. It was too late to save Mia, but her story ensured that other young women like her would have stronger protections in the future. Her family continues to honor her memory through the Marcano Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to improving safety and providing support for families of missing persons. Mia's story is one of trust, danger, and the devastating cost of negligence, a reminder that sometimes the people we think we can rely on are the very ones we should fear the most. Feet. Her mouth, also covered her body, was partially hidden beneath a pile of debris, sheets, trash bags, and broken wood, as if someone had tried to conceal her in a hurry. Detectives at the scene said it was clear that Mia had been placed there intentionally. The medical examiner later confirmed that she had died from homicidal violence, with strong evidence of asphyxiation. As the news spread, the entire community fell into silence. Hundreds of people who had helped in the search now stood in disbelief. Many had prayed that she would be found alive, but that hope was gone. Candlelight vigils were held across Florida, and social media flooded with tributes under the hashtag Justice for Mia Marcano. At the Orange County Sheriff's Office press conference that evening, Sheriff John Mina spoke solemnly. "Although we had all hoped for a different outcome, we can at least begin to bring closure to Mia's family and loved ones. Evidence clearly shows Armando Caballero is responsible for this heinous crime." He explained that digital forensics had tied Caballero directly to Mia's disappearance. His phone location data, the fake maintenance call, the misuse of the master key fob, and his movements on the night of her death, the timeline left no doubt. Armando had waited for Mia inside her apartment, attacked her when she returned home, and then transported her body to his old neighborhood before taking his own life. Days later, Mia's family, especially her father, Marlon, could barely hold back tears as he addressed the crowd that gathered outside their home. I prayed for a miracle, but now all I can do is pray for justice. My daughter didn't deserve this. She was loved. She was light. What made the case even more devastating was that it was entirely preventable. Armando's criminal history, including violent offenses and the possession of a weapon on school property, should have disqualified him from ever working in a residential complex, but there were no proper background checks, no safeguards in place to prevent people like him from having unrestricted access to tenants' homes. This failure sparked outrage across the country. Protests and rallies were held outside Arden villas and at state government offices, demanding legislative change. The Mia Marcano Foundation was soon established by her family to advocate for apartment safety and tenant rights. Their relentless push led to the passing of the Mia Marcano Act in 2022, mandating strict background screenings for maintenance employees and tracking systems for all master key fobs used in rental properties across Florida. It was a bittersweet victory, one born from tragedy today. Mia's name stands as both a warning and a legacy. Her story reminds everyone that evil can hide behind a friendly smile, a uniform, or a job title. Her father once said she trusted him because he was supposed to protect her home. Instead, that's where she lost her life. Mia's friends still describe her as radiant, someone who filled every room with laughter and light, though her life was stolen far too soon. Her legacy continues to protect countless others from meeting the same fate. Gone, but never forgotten. Mia Forever 19 Complex's lack of accountability only fueled the family's grief and anger to them. The silence spoke volumes. Mia's father, Marlon, said in a press conference, "She lived there, she worked there, and still not one person from that company reached out to us when she went missing. Not one." That tells you everything about how little they cared. As public outrage grew, the story of Mia Marcano became not just a tragedy, but a symbol, a reflection of systemic negligence and how corporate indifference can cost lives. News outlets across the nation covered the lawsuit, and countless tenants began sharing their own stories of safety concerns being ignored by property management companies. In the months that followed, Arden Villas changed management, and new safety protocols were put in place. Though, as Mia's family said, it was too late to save our girl, but out of the grief came purpose. In June 2022, the Mia Marcano Foundation officially launched its first nationwide safety campaign, focusing on background screenings and tenant education. The foundation began hosting self-defense workshops, creating emergency contact systems for tenants, and offering scholarships in Mia's name to students in the performing arts, her true passion before everything was stolen from Irby. The end of that same year, a powerful piece of legislation would be signed into law, the Mia Marcano Act. The law required all apartment complexes in Florida to implement advanced key fob tracking systems, perform thorough criminal background checks for maintenance staff, and limit employee access to units unless residents granted explicit permission. Standing beside lawmakers at the bill's signing, Mia's father spoke tearfully. "No other father should ever feel this pain. If this law saves even one life, then Mia's legacy will live on forever." Today, the law carries her name, but her story carries a warning, a reminder that safety should never be taken for granted for those who knew her. Mia wasn't just a victim, she was a friend, a daughter, an artist, and a light in every room she entered. Her best friends described her as fearless but gentle, someone who believed in the good in people, and that, tragically, was what cost her everything. Her case will forever stand as a haunting example of how quickly trust can be betrayed, and how one moment of negligence can destroy an entire world. But in the end, Mia's name now represents something bigger: justice, reform, and the determination of a family who refused to let her story fade into silence. Mia, forever 19, gone too soon, but never forgotten. The family hopes that through this lawsuit, they'll finally get the answers they've been searching for, and spark the real, lasting change that Mia deserved. Their attorney, Daryl Washington, stated that Mia's loved ones still believe others may have helped Armando in carrying out this horrific crime. He also criticized how the sheriff's department handled the investigation from the very beginning. Marano family says they have yet to receive complete reports or records from the sheriff's office, but Sheriff Mina insists the case remains open and under investigation. Frustration and grief spread among residents of Arden Villas. Protests broke out, and open letters began circulating, detailing how unsafe the complex had been for years. Tenants described a long history of poor lighting, broken gates, minimal security, and missing cameras, particularly in the parking areas, where not a single camera had ever been installed. Eventually, the family's lawsuit against Arden Villas reached a settlement, but their mission didn't end there. In honor of what would have been her 20th birthday, Mia was commemorated in her hometown. Her family was presented with a key to the city of Pembroke Pines, and her birthday was officially declared Mia Marcano Day. Just months later, in June 2022, Mia's law, Senate Bill 898, was signed into Florida law. It requires property owners to conduct thorough background checks on all potential employees, barring anyone with a history of violent crime or sexual offenses from being hired. The law also mandates strict key tracking logs for every apartment unit and extends maintenance entry notices from 12 hours to 24 hours, giving tenants more control and peace of mind to continue Mia's legacy. Her family established the Mia Marcano Foundation, MMF, a non-profit organization dedicated to supporting families of missing persons, advocating for student safety, and providing resources for those in crisis. The foundation also created the MMF Safe and Secure Accreditation Program, which helps apartment complexes improve their safety protocols and train their staff to prevent tragedies like Mia's from ever happening again. Through their work, Mia's family continues to turn heartbreak into hope. They've made significant progress, but their mission is far from over. When Mia booked her flight home on September 24, 2021, it was supposed to be just another weekend with family. No one could have imagined that a normal day would turn into a nightmare that changed so many lives forever. Aunt Pia reflected softly. You can never take time for granted. Life really is too short. I always thought I had forever. Her brother said that no matter what good comes his way, true happiness feels impossible without her. And Mia's mother, Emma, still searches for peace in the memories left behind for everyone else. Life goes on, she said, but I'm still here, trying to finish a puzzle that will never be complete. I think about her every day, every hour, every minute. She's everywhere, in every picture, every memory, but eventually there will be no more pictures, no more moments, just what's left of her love as the rain falls softly and the night grows still. Thank you for spending this time with me here at Crime Whisper. True crime reminds us of how fragile life can be and how vital it is to stay aware, even when the world feels quiet. Let the sound of the rain guide you to rest until we meet again. Stay safe, stay curious, and let the night watch over you.